German Chancellor Olaf Scholz attended the summit in London, but he is in a caretaker role after losing federal elections. And Conservative leader Friedrich Merz won the election and is trying to form a new government. Now, that's going to take several weeks, but there are reports that Merz wants the outgoing parliament to agree to boost spending on infrastructure and defense.
Well, from recent events, especially what we have seen from Washington in the last few days, particularly Friday evening our time, including the announcement today, there is tremendous pressure to act on the European side. And from my point of view, this also creates a certain time pressure. We now have to show that we are capable of acting independently in Europe.
We can speak now to Johann Wadephul, who's a member of the German parliament for Friedrich Merz's Christian Democrats and a defense and foreign policy expert. Welcome to DW. First of all, what can you tell us about a possible special session of the Bundestag next week?
Good afternoon. I think if you listen to the chairman, who will be the next chancellor, it is inevitable for Germany to stand up and to stay by Ukraine and to take again a leading role in Europe in making clear that after what happened in the Oval Office last week, to make the world clear, and especially to Mr. Putin clear, that Europe will not let down Ukraine, that Europe will stand with Ukraine. And for that very reason, we have to be capable to react. And that means in financial dimensions that we really have to boost our spending on defense very quickly. And that may then make it necessary to bring to ask the old parliament, the outgoing parliament, which is regularly still in place till the end of this month, to assemble again in the next week.
There has been some criticism of this, that this could be seen politically as going above voters' heads, since this government that would be voting would not be the one that they elected just over a week ago.
No, it's absolutely clear by our legal framework that the parliament, which was elected in the last election, is in place and able to act and to work and to legislate as long as not the new elected parliament gathered for the first time. And this will be the 25th of March of this month. So until then, the parliament is full in place and able to do each and everything. And I think everybody understands here in Germany that in this very situation Europe is in, we cannot risk a situation of uncertainty, of political uncertainty, especially for our security. And that means for the security not only of NATO, but especially also of Ukraine.
Now, some of the figures that are being floated are enormous. We've seen reports in various German media pointing toward 900 billion euros as an emergency fund. That's almost €1 trillion. Do you think that is realistic?
I don't want to speculate now here in the public about the figures you just mentioned, but it is clear for everybody that if we do react, we have to react in a way that everybody sees that we not only do it for the next 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months, but that Germany would be capable to finance all the tasks we are faced in questions of defense, in questions of infrastructure in this country for the next legislative period. So for at least the next 4 or 5 years.
Perhaps you could tell me what the Christian Democrats will be hoping to see and how much of these funds would go toward military spending versus domestic infrastructure investment.
I think the main task for us is the question of defense. So most of this money would have been to be invested into strengthening our defense capabilities. We have to go back to an army which we had in the last century, in the 80s and 90s of the last centuries, with more than 250,000 soldiers under arms. So for that very reason, we really need a huge number of money to be able to finance that.
I mean, as we've said, the numbers that we've heard in the press are simply enormous. Where is it going to come from, and what do you think voters will make of this figure?
Yep, the tasks are enormous, and so the numbers also have to be enormous. I don't want to speculate about where it comes from. It is absolutely clear that we need growth for the German economy, so that we can refund a lot of these things with taxes the state will achieve. The second thing is, of course, we will have a severe look into our budget, especially in all the spending we have in the social sector. I think a lot of money can be saved right there. And the third thing, of course, is that we will have to make some debts to bridge the gap we see now from the status we have right now and we expect to have in 2 or 3 years.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us today. We've been speaking with German parliamentarian Johann Wadephul with the CDU-CSU. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Simon Young. Simon, we're hearing huge sums are being discussed here. What have you been able to find out?
Well, Nicole, the people in the negotiations are staying very tight-lipped and not confirming any numbers. But the story that's been doing the rounds today is that the people in these talks have been looking at economic analysis that suggests that the sums needed are, as you say, pretty eye-watering. It talks about 400 billion euros needed to bring Germany's armed forces up to a sort of combat ready, or up to the state that it needs to be in. And another 500 billion for Germany's infrastructure, things like bridges and the railways and so on. So these are large amounts of money, but the negotiators say, well, you know, this is the first they've heard of those numbers when asked about it. But what is clear is that observers have been saying for months that, you know, some pretty hefty sums will be needed in both these areas, you know, to make up for a lack of investment in recent decades.
What's pretty remarkable about all of this is this talk about reconvening the old parliament, not the lawmakers elected just over a week ago. Now, why exactly does Friedrich Merz want to do that?
Yeah, so the point of this idea of holding a special session of the old Bundestag, not the one that was just elected, but the one that's as it were still in place until the new one can take up its duties, is that in that parliament there's a 2/3 majority of those people who would support some of these massive spending packages, in particular for defence. So, and there isn't going to be that 2/3 majority that would be needed to pass this sort of as a special package of, in effect, emergency funding in the newly elected parliament. So that's the reason for planning to do it. Now, nobody's confirming it's going to go ahead yet, but certainly if it does, it would be a gift to the far-right AfD, because of course they will say, well, you established long-standing political parties, you always accuse us of being undemocratic, but here are you in effect ignoring the result of the recent general election and the way it's changed majorities. So apart from that, of course, the timetable is very tight. Only got about a week in which they can do this. If it's going to happen, a lot of political risk involved with it. So I don't think it's certain quite yet.
That was DW's Simon Young. Thanks so much.
So let's talk to Marina Miron now, a military expert with the Department of Defense Studies at King's College London, joining us now from Munich. Marina, we've just discussed potentially huge sums of money in Berlin to help Ukraine and also to boost Germany's own defense capabilities. Just to paint a picture for us, what are Germany's capabilities as they stand, and how far do you think they could be expanded in, let's say, the next 5 years or so?
Good afternoon. Well, the second is a difficult question. So with the first one, in terms of defense capabilities, the German armed forces have been underfunded for the past 20 years. And if we compare Germany's military capabilities to the likes of the UK and France and even Italy, Germany is well behind in terms of its capabilities, naval capabilities, air capabilities. So Germany, being a big country, invests some 1.5% of its GDP into defense, which is very, very problematic. Therefore, it is not just the question of investing more money into the armed forces. It is also the question of changing the strategic culture. And we know historically it will be difficult to get people. How do you get people to join the armed forces? And how do you get people to fight? And those are two very fundamental questions. For instance, in the United States, we see it's a completely different strategic culture, and there is no problem in recruiting people. However, in Germany, it seems to be, if we look at the size of the armed forces, it's about 200,000, which is almost equivalent to what the United Kingdom has, and that including the reserves.
And so why is that? Just if I may ask, why do we see this difference?
We see this difference because of underfunding, because defense has not been taken very seriously, and because previous governments and defense ministers have not put enough emphasis on defense. And therefore, there was this idea that after the end of the Cold War, there will be a reliance on the United States protecting Europe. There are American troops stationed in Germany. Germany is enjoying U.S. nuclear protection, the nuclear umbrella. And now we come to a realization that Germany might need to step up its efforts to ensure its own defense. And so it takes many years of redoing what has been done wrong, what has been mismanaged in terms of capabilities, in terms of strategic culture, as I said, of educating people why one would need armed forces in the first place in order to make this work. It's not a mere thing of pouring money into the defense industry. And again, how quickly can you attain those capabilities? We're talking about the need for training, the need for equipment, the need for integration into the wider framework within NATO. So there are a lot of questions. How do you actually operationalize this plan? And I don't think 5 years will be enough.
Is there also a risk that this investment and rearming could trigger a Russian response? I mean, are we potentially facing the prospect of an arms race between Europe and Russia, and without backing from the US?
Well, I don't know if Russia is going to feel bothered unless German weapons will be stationed anywhere on Russian borders pointing at Russia. I think when we're talking about defense, we're talking about the defense of the German territory within the German jurisdiction. Therefore, I don't see why Russia would be particularly concerned about this fact, as long as it doesn't include anything related to Ukraine or Russia's sphere of influence. I don't think that we're going to see an arms race between the Russians and the Europeans. And the Russians know very well that Europeans lack the capabilities that the United States has militarily. And it will take a long time to make up for those capabilities, seeing the defense spending, seeing not just German defense spending, but overall of other NATO states, and also the different threat perception. The Baltics have a completely different threat perception from that exists, say, in Greece. And so there is no unity with the alliance, meaning that for Russia, it doesn't really present a threat, especially if the United States is out of the game. Single members like the UK and France might be more of a concern for Russia than Germany.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us as always. That's Marina Miron with King's College London.
Thank you for having me.